That afternoon, Asheville was draped in cold rain, tiny droplets sliding down my hands as I stood at my son's gate. I carried a porcelain box, the birthday gift for my granddaughter. All I pictured was her throwing her arms around me like always, but as I neared the window, the laughter from inside made me freeze. It wasn't a child's laugh, it was my husband's. Through the slit in the curtain, I saw him on the sofa, pressed close to my daughter-in-law. Her head rested on his shoulder, her fingers tracing little circles on his collar like they were a pair of secret lovers. Papers were scattered across the coffee table, and I only caught my daughter-in-law's voice, sweet but cold. "If you file for irreconcilable differences, we'll get at least half. And her old house. Let me handle improvements reimbursement." My husband chuckled, stroked her hair, and answered like he'd just signed my sentence. "Linda never suspects a thing. She spent her whole life trusting people." I stood on the porch, stunned, hearing my heart crack under the rain. The box slipped from my hands, the lid shattered, the ring of porcelain on tile like a death knell for 40 years of marriage. I didn't knock. I pulled out my phone, hit record, took a long breath, and thought, they've shown their hand, now it's my turn to set the board. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I stayed in the rain for a long while, my hands still shaking, whether from the cold or the truth that had just stabbed straight into my chest. I couldn't tell. The living room light kept spilling warm gold outside, where the two people I loved most were whispering how to take me down. I backed out of the yard, careful not to make a sound. Mud swallowed my shoes, my right one soaked through, but I felt nothing except emptiness. Back in the car, I sat in the dark with my hands on the wheel. Every sound seemed to die out, leaving only the cold wind through the frame and my heartbeat like a drum. I replayed the recording. Kelsey's voice, my daughter-in-law, rang clear through the speaker. "She'll never suspect." Each word was a small knife, lodging deep in my memory. I looked into the rearview mirror and saw my own face, a 66-year-old woman, gray-streaked hair, lined skin, tired eyes. A retired teacher who had spent a lifetime teaching students about honesty, trust, and decency, never imagining I'd be betrayed inside the very home I built. I inhaled deeply, pulled up my phone, and saved the recording. Then I opened my notes app and typed the first line, March 7th, 5:42 p.m. Asheville. Victor present at Jason's house, present with Kelsey. Divorce papers on the table. Conversation indicates they are planning to seize assets. I typed each word slowly and firmly, like grading an ethics paper gone wrong. Driving off that little street, I kept my speed steady so no one inside would notice. I knew I couldn't act on emotion. They know the law, and they had surely anticipated my reaction. I had to stay one step ahead. When I got home, our house at the end of the lane by the pines, where Victor and I had lived nearly 40 years, his truck was where it always was, by the garage. Now I finally understood why, for months, he'd said, busy at the shop, tough clients, working late, all lies. I walked in. The diffuser still carried a faint lavender scent I always turned on at night. The quiet felt too heavy. The morning paper he'd left lay on the dining table, a huge headline. High-profile divorce in Charlotte, wife loses everything. I let out a small laugh. How ironic that I was living that very story. I made myself a cup of black tea, set my phone on the table, and began recording a memo to myself. It's 7 p.m. I, Linda Carver, am documenting what I saw and heard. If anything happens to me, this will be the first piece of evidence. Victor and Kelsey are planning a sham divorce to seize assets. I have audio, time, and location. This will not be the last entry. I saved the file and named it Evidence 01. The tea cooled, but my head felt clearer than ever. I took out my old brown-covered notebook I used for lesson plans and wrote a title in blue ink, Counterplan. I split the page into 4 columns. Evidence. Money trail. Timeline. Action plan. I started listing each point in detail. 1. Victor lied about being at the shop all day. 2. His truck appeared at Jason's house at 5:30 p.m. 3. Kelsey had divorce documents. 4. They discussed improvement reimbursement and asset division. I wrote until my hand ached, but each line made me feel a little stronger. On the table, an old family photo stared back, Victor beaming next to Jason on our trip to Maine, me holding Lily. I brushed my fingers against the frame. That photo used to prove love and family. Now it was just a reminder of my own naivety. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up along with my trust. I knew I couldn't let emotions lead. I had to go back to who I was on the podium: rational, steady, methodical. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. Something was off. Lots of small withdrawals, hundreds here and there, spaced out every few days, something I'd never noticed before. I printed every statement, slipped them into a plastic sleeve, and labeled it "Suspicious Finances." Then I changed passwords on every account: bank, email, insurance, even social media. I disabled location sharing, then turned on two-factor authentication. That night when Victor came home, I pretended everything was normal. He opened the door, shook the rain off his coat, and said, "Rained all day. I was at the shop the whole time. The customer gave me a headache." I smiled and didn't answer. In my head, I logged it as a new entry. Repeated lie, 9:12 p.m., March 7th. He asked why I wasn't in bed yet. I said, "Waiting to have tea with you." I poured him tea, watched the steam rise, and wondered how many years I'd lived with a stranger I thought was my soulmate. After he went to shower, I opened my voice memos again and added, "Victor came home at 9:10. Feigned fatigue. Wouldn't look me in the eye." The "at the shop" story repeated. I saved the second file, evidence 02. Before bed, I opened the notebook again and wrote the day's final line: no confrontation, no display of emotion, collect, record, calculate, counter. I set the pen down, closed the notebook, and looked out at the fogged window. The rain hadn't stopped, but inside me, something else had begun: not a storm of tears, but a plan born from pain and the mind of a woman who taught ethics and justice her whole life. The next day, I would start where I'm strongest: patience and discipline. They think I'm just a gentle old woman? They'll learn the first lesson soon. No one plays chess like a woman who spent 40 years in silence. The next morning, when Victor left, I stood at the window watching him go. Brown leather jacket, shoes polished to a shine, things he never cared about before. After 4 decades together, I knew he once used the cheapest soap and hated cologne. Yet now, the bedroom still carried a new scent. An expensive men's fragrance, a little sharp and heady, like what I've smelled at Macy's around Christmas. I went to the dresser and saw a small cologne bottle among his vitamins, the label brand new. "A gift from whom, Victor?" I whispered, but didn't wait for an answer. I noticed every small detail, the things I used to overlook because I trusted him. His shirts were now always crisply ironed, even with a crease down the sleeve, something he never did, since his shop is all grease and oil. He said he wanted to look sharper to keep up appearances with clients. I just nodded, but in my head I wrote, March 8th. Sign: change in wardrobe habits, reason not credible. At noon, I called the shop to confirm. The foreman, Jimmy, sounded surprised on the line. "He already left early, ma'am. Said he had personal stuff to handle." "Personal?" I repeated, keeping my voice even. "Any idea what it was?" "Not really. Just said he'd be back later." I thanked him, hung up, and sat still. Victor almost never used to leave mid-shift. He used to brag, "If the crew doesn't take a break, neither does the boss." That line now sounded like a joke. By afternoon, I didn't go straight home after tutoring. Instinct pushed me to swing by my son's neighborhood. Maplewood was quiet as always, maples casting shadows on the stone-paved walk. As I turned the corner, my heart stopped. Victor's gray pickup sat neatly in front of Jason's garage. I killed the engine, parked 2 houses down, and reclined the seat so no one would see me. Through the misted glass, I saw them. Kelsey stood on the porch, blonde hair spilling over her shoulders. Victor stood close enough that their breath could have mingled. She tilted her head up, said something that made him smile, the smile I hadn't seen on him when he looked at me in a long time. Then Kelsey reached up, adjusted his collar, her fingers sliding slowly across his shoulder, then down his chest, intimate. No words needed, no more proof required. I understood. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and snapped a few quick shots. Each one was a stab, but my hand stayed steady. I noted the time, 4:47 p.m. License plate, NC 237FK. I saved everything in a folder labeled Proof. Just as I went to start the car, the house next door opened. Jason's neighbor, Mrs. Collins, stepped out in a blue knit coat, mail in hand. She spotted me and gave a little wave. I lowered the window and tried to smile like usual. "Oh, Linda, didn't know you were dropping by today." "Yes, just bringing a little treat for Lily." She smiled, then lowered her voice like sharing a secret. "Well, Victor's here a lot. I figured you two were moving to be closer to your son." I kept my face neutral, but my hand tightened on the wheel. "Yes, maybe he's helping Jason with repairs." "That's nice, but you know, they seem very close, like a truly tight father-son pair." I only nodded, then quickly excused myself. As I drove off, her words echoed, "Victor's here often." That night when he came home, I set dinner like always, roast and mashed potatoes. He talked about busy days at the shop and grumbled about picky clients. I smiled and quietly served him another slice. Inside, I added a new line. Lie continues, 8:17 p.m. After he fell asleep, I gathered his laundry. In his coat pocket, I found a motel receipt. Green Valley Motel, Asheville downtown, dated last week. Time, from 1:20 p.m. to 5:10 p.m. I sat on the bed, hands trembling as I stared at the bold print. Room 214 paid in cash. There's no explanation that could excuse that. I tucked the receipt into an envelope, wrote the date, and hid it in the secret drawer of my desk. The papers were stacking up tiny pieces of evidence, but I knew each fragment would soon form the full picture. 2 days later, after Victor left, I pulled up our bank statements again. A pattern jumped out. Small withdrawals, only about $100 to $200 at the same ATM, less than a mile from Jason's house. Over the past 2 months, more than 10 such transactions. I printed the statements and marked each line in red pen. Every time I looked at the numbers, anger rose, not about the money, but the contempt. In the late afternoon, I sat by the window, sunset washing gold over the old wood floor. I glanced at the wedding photo on the wall, Victor in a black tuxedo, me in a puff-sleeved white dress. Back then he told me, "I'll never give you a reason to doubt me." I smiled faintly, a smile drained of feeling. I opened my phone and pulled up the photo folder. Porch snapshots, the motel receipt, statements, everything carefully filed. I named the folder Silent Storm. Each night I opened it and dropped in another piece, like a craftswoman patiently stitching each thread into the great fabric of truth. I knew I couldn't unload this pain on anyone else, not yet. Jason couldn't know. My son was buried in work and blind faith in the woman he loved, and I certainly couldn't let Kelsey realize I was awake now. She's a lawyer, sharp and calculating. One mistake, and I'd lose my chance to strike back. I pressed it all down, no crying, no shouting. Only the silence of someone who has lived long enough to know tears are a luxury, while composure is a weapon. Before bed, I pulled out a portable hard drive, backed everything up to the cloud, and set a new password. I also sent a copy of the folder to a backup email only I knew. Each small step felt like building a fortress around myself. Finally, I sat at my desk and wrote the 3 people I could trust. First, Daniel Whitaker, the lawyer who helped a friend get a fair divorce even though her husband was a big businessman. Second, Martha Hale, the accountant friend from my teaching days, practical and discreet. And last, Joan Reed, my former principal, who once told me something I never forgot. Sometimes, silence is the biggest lesson of all. I wrote their names down and gently closed the notebook. Outside, rain began again, whispering like someone reading out the errors of the past. I shut my eyes, listened to the rain blend with the tick of the clock, and knew that from now on, each passing day would be a new stitch cinching up the net of truth, and I, the woman they thought was old and naive, was quietly pulling the first threads. 3 days later, after Victor left for work, I grabbed my bag and slipped in every receipt, photo, and my notebook. I dressed plainly like always, but I knew, today, I wasn't the gentle, silent wife anymore. I was an investigator investigating my own marriage. Blue Ridge Community Bank sits downtown, where Victor and I opened a joint account more than 20 years ago. The teller I knew, Megan, greeted me with a polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Carver. How can I help you today?" I smiled back and set my ID on the counter. "I'd like full statements for the past 6 months on all accounts under my name and my husband's, plus any related transfers." Megan hesitated a beat. "Would you like paper or electronic copies, ma'am?" "Both. And I'll need them today." I saw her surprise, but she didn't pry. 15 minutes later, she brought over a thick stack. I sat at the waiting table, opened each page, and lightly penciled the odd transactions. Over 6 months, there were 24 small cash withdrawals, ranging from $100 to $400, totaling $7,800. They appeared almost weekly, mostly at the same ATM, the one on the corner near Jason's. I held the statement, a chill creeping up my wrists. I turned the page, Victor's secondary credit card. Transactions matched the timing. Le Chandelier Bistro, Hearth and Home Furniture, and Auburn Gifts, high-end spots I'd never set foot in, but I knew who had. I noted carefully, February 3rd, Le Chandelier Bistro, $248 dinner for 2. February 10th, Hearth and Home, $1,245 gray silk sofa. February 17th, Auburn Gifts, $389 crystal photo frame. I sat there over an hour, linking the timeline to Victor's late at the shop nights. Everything lined up a kind of perfection that made it hard to breathe. When I left the bank, the sun had begun to break through. Light filtered across the glass, making the statement shimmer like a mirror, reflecting a woman holding a map of her husband's sins. Back home, I brewed a pot of black coffee, opened my laptop, and entered everything into a spreadsheet. Date, amount, location, notes, flag. Line by line, the tiny text on the screen turned into a portrait of betrayal without a single confession. At 1 p.m., I called Martha Hale, my old friend, who once handled accounting for a law firm. Her voice was steady and warm as ever. "Linda? Long time. So, this is about money, isn't it?" I hesitated a few seconds, then told the truth. "Martha, I think Victor is hiding money, and I need to protect my share without tipping him off." Silence for a few beats. Then Martha spoke softly but firmly. "First, don't withdraw anything. Leave it as is. Let the trail stay clear. But open a new account in only your name at a different bank. And print every document, more is better." I did that this morning. "Good. And the house? That place was yours before marriage, right?" "Yes. I bought it with my mother's inheritance before the wedding." "Perfect. Then no one touches it if the deed stays solely in your name. Check the file, make sure there was no retitling into marital property." After the call, I went to my office, opened the safe, and pulled the deed. The line still read, "Linda May, Carver Sole Owner." I took photos, printed 2 copies, one for a folder labeled Separate Property, one for my backup safe deposit box. While I was sorting papers, my phone pinged transaction alert. Victor just spent $1,700 at Riley's Jewelers. I didn't have to guess who the gift was for. I opened my inbox and hit print. Sheet after sheet slid out, each one evidence that couldn't be denied. I marked each page and arranged them by date. Every whir of the printer made the room feel heavier. By late afternoon, I stared at the pines behind the house, shifting color in the fading light. I remembered Victor standing out there cutting grass, wiping down the truck, smiling at me from a distance. Now it was only the hollow outline of a man I'd once trusted with my life. I closed the file, took a deep breath, and headed to Best Buy at the mall. I bought a Sony mini voice recorder, lighter size, clips to a pocket. I picked up extra memory cards and spare batteries. When the clerk asked, "Using it for lectures?" I smiled slightly. No, to record the truth. On the way home, I pulled over, took out my notebook, and wrote, March 10th. Bought mini recorder. Purpose, collect audio evidence. Plan to use during a test conversation with Kelsey. I already had a plan to approach her not with rage, but with a mind game. A teacher who spent a lifetime on words would now use words to probe the one who betrayed her. That night, Victor came home late. He said traffic because of rain. I glanced at the clock, 9:30 p.m. His eyes slid away when I asked if he wanted dinner. He shook his head, said he'd eaten with a client. I only answered with a short, "Okay," then cleared the table. In my mind, the timestamps lined up like a spreadsheet ready to run. After he fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room. The house was so quiet I could hear the rain tapping the roof. I opened the laptop and added the day's final line. March 10th, Riley's Jewelers, $1,700, Victor's card. Conclusion, withdrawals and spending outside the marriage. I shut the laptop and leaned back. Part of me wanted to scream and confront him right then, but the rational part, the one I honed over 40 years of teaching, said something else. Don't rush. They're strong with words, but weak against evidence. And evidence, you have it. I looked up at the wall clock, the minute hand crawled, patient as I am now. The next day, I drafted my script to probe Kelsey. I'd swing by my sons with an excuse, bringing cookies. For Lily, and casually, share how a friend suspects her husband is cheating, then ask my daughter-in-law, a lawyer, a woman who's seen every divorce, for advice. She wouldn't suspect a thing. I still played the doting, naive mother perfectly. I wrote each innocent question. 1. If a husband hides money from his wife, what can the wife do? 2. What if the asset is a premarital house? 3. Is there a way to prove he used marital funds for personal purposes? I reread and tweaked every word, like prepping for the last lecture of my life, a lecture for myself. When I finished, I folded the paper and tucked it inside my brown notebook. In my head, everything was finally in order. I wasn't out for revenge. I was reclaiming the truth. And in a world full of lies, I knew only money doesn't lie. I turned off the lamp and looked out the window. The rain had stopped, yellow light pooled on the wet pavement. In the glass, my eyes no longer trembled. Maybe, for the first time in years, I saw the woman I used to be, a woman who can look straight at the truth, no matter how cruel it is. I used to think things like the cloud, GPS tracking, or anonymous email were just for kids. I taught grammar for 40 years and never needed to know how a phone worked beyond calling and texting. But now that my life had turned into an unofficial investigation, I knew I had to relearn it all, and this time, the syllabus was my survival. The first person I thought of was Noah, the 16-year-old next door, the Hendersons' son. Smart kid, he'd helped me reset the Wi-Fi a few months back. I waited until afternoon, saw him washing the car in the driveway, and called over. Noah, do you have a minute? I need help with some tech stuff. He looked up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and grinned. Of course, Miss Linda. I know you're the most dedicated student on the block. We sat on my porch. I laid out my phone, laptop, and the new mini recorder on the table. I want to learn how to record discreetly, store data safely in the cloud, and track a specific item like Find My iPhone, but for keys. Noah's eyes widened, amused. Are you doing a project? I smiled. Yes, a project about honesty. He laughed and didn't pry. For 2 hours I learned how to set up an AirTag, sync it with my iPhone, and hide the app so no one would spot it. Noah also showed me how to set alerts if the tracked item moved outside a safe zone. I tested hiding the AirTag on Victor's keyring, the birthday gift he'd bragged about, because it's engraved with my name. I took a photo and tagged the first location. Garage 5:52 p.m. He also showed me how to create a private folder in iCloud that only I could access. Use a password with letters, numbers, and symbols. Don't use birthdays or family names, Noah said. I nodded and wrote in my notebook like I was taking dictation. Don't let anyone guess I know. Before he left, Noah installed a movement tracking app linked to the AirTag and said, Now, if the keys go anywhere, you'll know. Even when you're not home. I thanked him, handed over some fresh-baked cookies, and joked, I'll never mark you down if you forget your homework. That night, I started testing the recorder. I clipped the tiny device inside my cardigan sleeve, then talked normally to myself to check the audio. After that, I tried it in my purse, in a water bottle, even tucked between books on the shelf. Each playback, I adjusted levels and found the clearest spots. It felt like lesson planning, except this time, I wasn't teaching students. I was teaching myself how to survive in a world of liars. When I felt confident, I opened my laptop and created a secret email address. No real name, no profile photo. I chose Old Bookshelf 89, my way of reminding myself I was still the bookish old teacher, not a detective in my own life. I uploaded everything there, audio files, photos, statements, receipt images. I also backed up my entire iMessage thread with Victor. Some texts looked harmless at first, but reading them again, I saw the layers of coldness dressed up as politeness. I'm busy tonight. Sleeping at the shop. Don't wait up for dinner. Those aren't a husband's texts. They're a man splitting his time between two separate lives. For 3 nights straight, I tracked the AirTag data. Victor's schedule was almost down to the minute. 7 a.m. Out the door, 8 a.m. At the shop, noon leaving, 12:20 p.m., arriving in Jason's neighborhood, and back downtown at 5 p.m. One morning I printed the movement map and stared at the blinking blue dots like footprints of betrayal on the screen. I taped that map to the wall beneath a line. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be seen. On day 6, I decided to stage a Lily's birthday plan so I'd have a legitimate reason to be at Kelsey's house. I texted Jason, I want to bring cookies and start decorating for Lily's birthday. Is this weekend okay? Jason replied fast, Of course, Mom. Kelsey said she's getting a gift for her too. I smiled. Everything was set. I'd arrive early with the recorder and a gift bag with a small pin cam clipped inside a brooch. I wasn't aiming to catch them in the act, but to capture how they looked at each other, how they spoke, how they performed the role of a perfect family. While prepping, I bought a doorbell camera with online storage. I told Victor I wanted more security because I heard about break-ins nearby. He agreed right away, not suspecting I needed a reason to see who came and went from my house each day. That evening, I installed the camera and checked the angle. Anytime Victor came home late, I could see him through the app. I studied his patterns, often sitting in the car for a few minutes, as if rehearsing the lie in his head. One night, I watched him wipe his collar with a tissue before coming inside. I zoomed in. There was a faint lipstick mark, bright red. I saved that clip and timestamped it. What I felt now wasn't pain, it was cold clarity. Everything in my marriage fell into two buckets: data and target. If I let feelings in, I'd lose. If I stayed logical, I could force them to face their own consequences. Once I had enough, I drafted my first summary. Each line short and precise, like a case brief: 24 small cash withdrawals totaling $7,800. Restaurant, furniture, and jewelry receipts matching Victor's absences. AirTag pings matching Jason's address 4 days a week. Motel receipt and images of intimate interactions with Kelsey. Using the anonymous email, I sent the files to attorney Daniel Whitaker, Martha's contact I'd never met, only told he was principled and does not tolerate crooked lawyers. I wrote the subject, Case, Marital Asset Fraud Request Confidential Assessment. In the body, I kept it brief. I am a wife suspected of being deceived and having assets diverted. This is the initial data set. Please confirm receipt and protect my identity. When I hit send, my heart thumped once, then settled. No one knew what I'd just done. Victor was still asleep on the sofa with the news on. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now just a figure in my counterplan. I closed the laptop, turned off the lights, and stepped onto the porch. Asheville's night was quiet wind through the pines, warm lamplight on wet brick. In the dark, I didn't feel like a betrayed wife anymore. I felt like an older student who just passed her first exam in the digital age. I'd learned that technology isn't only for the young. It's the new language of truth, and once a teacher learns that language, no liar can outsmart her. Saturday morning, Asheville was clear as glass. I slipped a box of chocolate chip cookies into a tote and checked the mini recorder hidden under the napkin lining. The tiny red light blinked. Everything was ready. I looked in the mirror, fixed my hair, and smiled, not the smile of a victor, but of someone who has learned to hide her feelings. I got to Jason's right at noon. Kelsey opened the door, still pretty, makeup light but polished. She hesitated a beat when she saw me, then gave a polite smile. "Oh, you're early." Jason just ran out to grab a few things for lunch. "That's fine. I just brought some cookies for Lily. She loves these." I walked in, keeping my manner easy. The house still smelled like vanilla candles, soft music playing from the speakers. I noticed it right away. The living room sofa wasn't the old one. It was a gray velvet set, identical to the furniture receipt I'd seen on the statement. I brushed the edge and smiled. "Beautiful sofa. New?" Yeah, a designer friend gave me a discount," she answered a little too quickly. I sat, set the cookie box on the table, and began, "I've noticed Victor's been different lately." Kelsey tilted her head, her face shifting to practiced concern. "Different how?" "Home late more often. Says he's at the shop all evening, but he smells like cologne and his shirts are crisply ironed. Do you think it's normal for a 61-year-old man to change like that?" She gave a small, sympathetic smile. "Maybe he just wants to refresh himself. Men get scared of aging sometimes, so they pay more attention to how they look." I looked straight at her, calm. "Maybe, but if a friend of mine suspects her husband is cheating and the other person is a relative by marriage, what would a lawyer advise her to do?" Kelsey froze briefly, picked up her phone, fingers flying, probably a text. She replied in a more professional tone. "Well, first she needs evidence, you know that. Then prep for asset division. If there's a house, land, or joint accounts, she should lock it all down. And if the husband tries to move money, the wife can ask the court to freeze assets." I nodded, attentive. "What about a separate house? Say a premarital property?" She arched a brow, clearly interested in the legal angle. "Technically separate property isn't split, but if there were upgrades, renovations, improvements during the marriage, and joint contributions can be proven, the other side can still claim reimbursement. Depends on how good the lawyer is." She sounded so confident, I could almost hear the arrogance. I feigned confusion. Wow, complicated. So if the husband has a strong lawyer, the wife could lose a lot? Kelsey smirked slightly. Not necessarily. What matters is who prepares first. If you plan it well, the person who understands the law won't lose anything. That line hit the quiet room like a pebble thrown onto a still lake. I felt every word, "won't lose anything." It wasn't advice, it was the manifesto of someone practicing it. I still remember that moment, her confident smile, me just listening, steady as a lake. Not because I was weak, but because I already knew. Wind can blow words away, but it can't blow away evidence. What do you think about that moment? Is silence the strongest form of payback? Tell me in the comments, I truly want to know what you'd choose. I chuckled lightly, easy as small talk. Sounds like you've handled a lot of these cases, huh? She laughed softly, shrugged. Oh, it's the job. At my firm, divorces over assets happen all the time. I glanced down at the phone in my purse. The recording light was still on. Everything was being captured, every word. Right then, Lily burst out of her room, pigtails bouncing, clutching a plastic doll. She squealed, "Grandma, you're here." I opened my arms and kissed her forehead. The warmth softened me. But her next line cut cold. "Grandpa came yesterday when Dad was at work. Mom said he was fixing the cabinet." The room went silent. I kept smiling, smoothing her hair. "Really? Grandpa's very handy." Kelsey hurried up to gather cups, flustered. "She's just chatting, Mom." Victor only stopped by to say hello. I looked at her, expression unchanged. Kids remember well. Sometimes better and more honestly than adults. The air grew heavy. I stood and glanced at my watch. I should get dinner started. I'll catch Jason another time. Kelsey nodded, voice stiff. Okay. Drive safe. I bent to kiss Lily again, keeping my voice warm. Keep Grandma's secret, okay? I'll bring cake next time. She giggled, oblivious to the storm gathering around her. Out at the car, my hands trembled slightly. I shut the door and took a long breath. My heart pounded, but I knew I couldn't let emotion win. I saved the recording. Length, 42 minutes. Clear audio. I played a few clips. Kelsey's steady professional tone, punctuated by her soft laugh. If joint improvements can be proven, the other side can claim a share. What matters is who prepares first. Won't lose anything. Those 3 lines, just 3, sketched the entire picture. I drove slowly down Maplewood, sunlight filtering through the leaves. In the rear view, I saw my reflection calm, but with something resolute in my eyes. The anger had settled, replaced by cold focus. I was no longer the one being fooled. I was becoming the one who keeps the record. At home, I unpacked, plugged the recorder into my laptop. The audio file appeared, waveforms neat and even. I renamed it Kelsey Interview 1, then filed it into Silent Storm. I sent a copy to Daniel Whitaker's anonymous intake email with a note, audio of discussion between female subject K and me, March 16th, duration 42 minutes. Content indicates intent to seize assets via improvements reimbursement. Please confirm confidentiality. I hit send and watched the screen. Mail sent successfully popped up, tiny words with enormous weight. That night, Victor came home late, said there was a new client, needed negotiating. I nodded, pretended to be tired, and went upstairs first. Once the door closed, I opened my phone to the location app. The blue dot, the AirTag on his keys, was parked at the address I knew by heart, Jason's house. I smiled softly, not out of pain, but because I realized their secrets were now telling on themselves through the data. I didn't even need to ask. I opened my notebook and wrote one short line. Today, March 16th. Successful recording. Kelsey confirms legal knowledge and financial motive. Lily provides supporting detail. Collection phase nearly complete. I closed the notebook and set the pen down. Outside, a thin crescent moon hung low, silver light slipping through the curtains onto the spread of papers, evidence, maps, receipts, statements, all weaving the betrayal they themselves had authored. And I, the woman once dismissed as weak, was writing its ending with planned silence. I never thought I'd walk into a law office not to sign a contract or notarize a form, but to plan a counterattack against my own husband and daughter-in-law. But that morning, as Asheville's sun touched the tall panes of Whitaker and Associates, I knew there was no turning back. Daniel Whitaker's office was on the 4th floor, neat and bright, the smell of coffee mixing with new paper. He was in his 50s, tall, with silvering hair and gray eyes sharp enough to read my story before I spoke. When I set the thick folder on his desk, he nodded slightly and said, "Steady. Martha gave me a heads up. But I have to say, you've done a professional investigator's job. Your filing system is problem, something I could learn from." I gave a dry smile. "I'm only doing what I need to protect myself, Mr. Whitaker." He went sheet by sheet, statements, photos, audio, even the AirTag route maps I'd printed. Each time he nodded, a bit of weight lifted, not for the praise, but because I wasn't carrying this alone anymore. After nearly 20 minutes, he set his glasses down and looked at me. "First, we need to temporarily freeze the joint accounts. Based on this evidence, I can file for an emergency freeze due to suspected misuse of marital assets. Once frozen, all transactions stop immediately." I nodded. "I want that done as soon as possible. We'll do it Monday at 8:30 a.m. I'll draft the papers this afternoon, you just sign." He poured more coffee, voice even but careful. "As for Kelsey, this part is delicate. She's an attorney, which means ethical obligations. If you provide sufficient proof that she exploited family information for personal gain, I can file an ethics complaint with the state bar. That won't just ruin her reputation, she could be suspended." I tightened my grip on the cup, eyes on the desk. "I don't want to destroy anyone, but she destroyed my family." "I understand," he said slowly. "So we'll run 2 tracks. Plan A, reconciliation. You confront them in a family meeting, present the evidence, and give them the option to sign a quiet separation agreement. Plan B, if they push back, I file immediately. You have evidence, a potential witness, and legal grounds. They won't have room to maneuver." I was quiet for a few seconds, then asked, "Which do you think they'll choose?" "Smart people choose silence. Arrogant people choose a fight. From what you've described, they'll fight. That's better for us. Angry people confess for free." We mapped the steps. He wrote briskly. 1. Monday, 8:30 a.m. Freeze all joint accounts. 2. Monday, 9:15. Notify the bank and the insurance company. 3. Same day, 2 p.m. You'll sign a formal retainer so I can represent you. 4. Tuesday, prep the ethics complaint against Kelsey. 5. Wednesday, send the family meeting invitation, our trigger point. When he capped his pen, I looked at the strong handwriting, each line nailing down the plan to win my fairness back. Before I left, he said, "I'll need Martha to verify any home improvements they might claim. Have her audit receipts, materials, and actual timelines so we can counter precisely." That afternoon, I went to Martha's. Her small house was as tidy as ever, cinnamon in the air. After I laid it out, she nodded firmly. "They want to say renovations? I'll show them what real books look like. If it was paid with your separate funds, I can prove every cent." She opened her laptop and a spreadsheet. "How far back do you keep receipts?" "Since 2001. All in the file cabinet." Martha laughed and patted my hand. "Then this is easy. No one beats a teacher who keeps her paperwork. We reviewed every item: paint, roof repair, hardwood flooring. Most were charged to my individual card." Her fingers tapped, then she said, "Done. I'll write a detailed valuation memo for the attorney. And for the house value, hire an independent appraiser so they can't claim appreciation came from joint effort." That night, I came home, pulled the old property files. The deed still read, Linda Mae Carver Soleil ownership. Next to it, a 2019 appraisal. I snapped photos to send Martha and asked her to line up a current valuation for comparison. I also printed the legal authorization Daniel had emailed. Reading every line, my chest felt heavy but firm. After I signed, I sealed it in an envelope with a small rose stamp, the one I used to mark literature essays. An old habit, now a symbol of resolve. Late, I sat in my office, the desk lamp glowing on stacks sorted like textbooks. I opened my laptop and created a folder titled Phase 2 Counter-Strike. Each subfolder labeled Financial Evidence, Professional Ethics Evidence, Family Meeting Script, Temporary Lodging Emergency Plan. That last one made me pause. I knew if things spun out, I'd have to leave this house at least for a while. Not out of fear, but to work safely. I called my trusted friend, former principal Joan Reed. Joan, if I need a place for a few days, is your lakeside cottage free? She didn't hesitate. Always a room for an old friend, come whenever. Thank you, it may be soon. I ended the call and opened the window. Night was quiet, just crickets. I wondered how life veered this way, from a wife planning meals to a woman planning legal strategy. Strangely, I wasn't afraid. When trust is gone, instinct and reason take over. Next morning, I got up early, brewed coffee, and prepped materials to send Daniel. When Victor stepped out of the bedroom, I kept the same calm as always. He asked, "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep. I want to reorganize the file cabinet and get the tax binder ready." He nodded, not the least bit suspicious. I watched him head for the door, the key ring with the AirTag glinting in the sun. The blue dot on my phone's map would start moving again, leading me to places he never imagined were being tracked. I smiled, not bitterly, just the smile of someone who knows she's holding the upper hand. That afternoon, I got a confirmation email from Daniel Whitaker. Received all documents. Account freeze order will be submitted at 8:30 a.m., Monday. Have your ID and the power of attorney ready to sign at the bank. After that, we'll plan the family meeting later in the week. Let them believe you're still the gentle woman they think they know. I reread the last line, let them believe. I don't think I've ever seen advice so perfectly true. That evening, I baked an apple pie, Victor's favorite. When he came home, I served it like nothing was wrong. He said, "This is great. You always know how to spoil me." I smiled and answered softly, "Sometimes I just want things a little warmer, before they go completely cold." He laughed, not understanding, and I looked down at the rich, fragrant slice of pie, thinking, in 2 days, you'll know what it feels like to lose everything. The night before Monday, I organized the files one last time and tucked them into a leather bag. On the sticky note outside, I wrote briefly, Monday, 8:30 a. Freeze. Wednesday, family meeting. No trembling. No forgiveness. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a long moment. Moonlight slipped through the curtains and fell across my hand, the hand that had cooked meals, written lesson plans, wiped my son's tears. Now it was about to sign the paper that would change our family's course forever. But maybe justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from a woman who stands up quietly at the right time. Monday morning, 7:45. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, looking out at the garden still covered in dew. Everything was quiet, except the clock ticking like a countdown. Next to me, my phone showed a new email from Blue Ridge Community Bank. Confirmation of temporary legal hold on accounts. I read that line over and over, feeling like I'd just laid the first brick of a protective wall. Right at 8:30, per Daniel Whitaker's plan, all joint accounts for Victor and me were completely frozen. Every transaction, credit card, auto transfer, everything stopped at once. I pictured Victor at a gas station, swiping his card like usual, and the machine saying, Transaction declined. He'd probably think it was a glitch. But in a few hours he'd learn the error wasn't in the machine, it was in his choices. 9:55. My phone buzzed. Victor's name lit the screen. I answered slowly. Linda? Can you check what's going on? My card won't run. The ATM's failing too. Even the auxiliary business account is locked. I kept my voice even. Really? I'll call the bank and ask. They're probably doing maintenance, but it's weird my other joint account is down too. Can you call them for me? Sure, I'll check, don't worry. His voice shook a bit, though he tried to sound calm. I heard typing and a car door slam. He was probably trying to pull cash somewhere. When the call ended, I checked the time exactly 10 a.m. Step 1. Perfect. At 11 a.m., the phone rang again. This time it was Kelsey. Hi, Mom, Victor said. There's an issue with the accounts. I have a friend in the banking system who can take a quick look. If you give me the account numbers, I can call them to speed things up. Her tone was soft, but every word felt like a probe. I let a pause sit, then answered slowly. Oh, that's kind. But I think it's just a technical mix-up. I'll call the bank, no need to trouble you. Mom, banks are usually slow to respond. I just need a few minutes. I cut in gently but firmly. It's okay. I prefer speaking directly. I put the call on speaker and dialed the bank's customer service right in front of her. She didn't know I had auto record turned on. Hello, this is Linda Carver. Our accounts were just frozen. I'd like to know why. The woman on the other end spoke clearly. Yes, Miss Carver. I see the freeze was initiated this morning under our customer protection protocols due to a pattern of suspicious small withdrawals and transfers to an unidentified third party. The hold will remain until verification. I pressed my lips together to hide a smile and asked as if I were truly surprised. Oh, thank you. Is there any way to lift it? No, ma'am. This requires both account holders to appear with identification and the presence of legal counsel. We will contact attorney Daniel Whitaker's office listed on file. Beside me, Kelsey went rigid. I watched the color drain from her face. I turned to her, voice light as small talk. Did you hear that, dear? They said it has to go through my attorney. Good thing he's already reviewing these transactions for me. She forced a laugh. Ah, I see. Must be a misunderstanding. I'll have Victor call back later. Sure. But one more thing. I looked her straight in the eye, still mild. When dealing with a bank, transparency is best. Their systems track closely. Even the tiniest things leave a trace. She swallowed hard, gripping her phone. She was trying to hold it together, but her eyes were pure panic. I poured more tea and slid a cup toward her. This afternoon I'd like you and Jason and Victor to come over for tea just to talk as a family. It's been a while. This afternoon? Yes. There are a few things I want to discuss before it all goes too far. She nodded, struggling to smile. Okay, I'll let Jason know. Thanks. I'll send a formal invitation with Daniel present as well. To keep it proper. I saw her gaze darken for a second. The woman who thought she controlled the board was now in my house, hands shaking around a teacup. I didn't need to shout or threaten. One phrase, my attorney, was enough to tell Kelsey the board had tipped. After she left, I called Daniel Whitaker and recapped everything. He gave a low chuckle, steady as if he'd predicted it. Told you they'd call immediately. They can't stand losing control. Now just wait. I'll send a formal meeting invite for 4 p.m., co-signed by me. Perfect. I want it to feel like a simple chat, but when they arrive, they'll realize it's a hearing. I heard his soft laugh. You have a strategist's instinct, Linda. No. I'm just a wife who trusted too much. At noon, Victor came home. His face was dark, sweat beading on his forehead. Did you call the bank? I've been shut down all morning. Our accountant says the accounts are closed. I feigned confusion and poured him a glass of water. I did. They said there were suspicious transactions. Maybe someone's been using the accounts improperly. Improperly? He frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Small, repeated withdrawals, then transfers to a third party. They said they'll go over it with my attorney. We should know more tomorrow. He stared at me, shocked and a little afraid. For the first time in months, he couldn't hide. The confident posture, the calm tone gone. I stayed seated, smiling as I slid the invitation across the table. This afternoon, I've invited you, Jason, and Kelsey over for tea. We need to talk. He glanced at the paper and saw Daniel Whitaker's signature. His mouth trembled. You actually hired a lawyer? Yes. Sometimes to keep the peace, you need a witness. He said nothing, eyes darting away, then grabbed his keys and left without another word. I watched him go, feeling no old ache. When the door closed, I exhaled and carefully folded the second invitation for Kelsey and Jason and slipped it into an envelope. I emailed a copy to Daniel. Subject line, Carver family, meeting at 4 p.m. Today, attorney present. In the body, I wrote briefly, requesting full attendance of all parties. This meeting is conciliatory in nature before proceeding with further legal steps. After sending, I stood and set the tea table. The house was quiet again, only the steady tick of the clock. I looked at the white porcelain cups and polished each one. Everything had to be perfect, because this afternoon, in this room, the truth would be poured like hot tea, impossible to take back. I smiled faintly. They think I'm gentle, fragile. But they forget, once that woman learns to control the money, the very thing they used to control her, the whole game changes. Outside, sunlight slanted through the window, spilling across the table. I topped off the kettle and listened to the soft boil. A new chapter was about to begin, and this time, every card was in my hand. That afternoon, Asheville's sky wore a thin veil of clouds, a pale light that made everything in the house look as if it were waiting. I set the tea in the living room, the place that had been the calm heart of our family, now a temporary hearing room for the most important confrontation of my life. On the table, between the white cups and the jasmine pot, I laid a black folder in neat order. Inside was everything I'd gathered over 3 weeks: the money tracker, motel receipt, furniture invoices, photos, recordings, location data. Each sheet was a sharp, cold slice of truth. At 4 p.m., sharp, a car stopped out front. I looked out. Victor with Jason and Kelsey. All three stepped out, their faces tight. I opened the door, voice easy. Come in, the tea's just ready. No one answered. Jason tried a strained smile. Kelsey stared at her phone like it could shield her. Victor paused when he saw the formal invite with the law office logo on the table. I seated them, poured tea, then said calmly, "Before we start, I want you to know this conversation is being recorded legally. It's to prevent misunderstandings. No one leaves until we're done." Victor looked up, color draining. "Linda, what is this? You turning the house into a courtroom?" "No, just opening a black box, the one holding everything you thought you'd keep hidden forever." I opened the folder and pulled out the first financial summary. Here are the last 6 months of statements, 24 small cash withdrawals totaling $7,800, all from the joint account. Can you explain why each withdrawal lines up with restaurant and furniture receipts and the address of Hearth and Home? Victor said nothing. Jason looked at his father. Kelsey shifted, fists tight around her phone. I went on, steady and clear. "And here's the Green Valley Motel receipt, room 214, cash payment. March 8th. That day you told me power outage at the shop, had to stay and watch the machines. I checked the AirTag on your keys. It sat at that exact location for over 4 hours. Victor lifted his head, lips pressed, eyes avoiding mine. "You were tracking me?" "No, I learned to protect myself." "And this?" I slid another printout as a photo of the red lipstick on your shirt collar. The shade matches crimson rose, the one Kelsey uses. I noticed it on her vanity that same day. The room froze. Jason's voice cracked. Mom, what are you saying? I looked at my son, softer for a moment. I didn't want to, sweetheart. But silence is complicity. And I can't be complicit in wrong. I turned to Kelsey, opened my laptop, and played the recording. Her voice filled the still air. If joint improvements can be proven, the other side can claim a share. What matters is who prepares first. Won't lose anything. Kelsey went pale, lips trembling. You recorded me, Mom? I was just speaking in theory. Really? That's odd, because right after that, a motel booking email from Kelsey, lawfirm@gmail, matches the exact time the AirTag shows Victor on site. I have the screenshots, and the IP address matches Jason's home Wi-Fi. Jason shot to his feet, hands shaking. Kelsey? She grabbed his hand. Jason, let me explain. I cut in, still calm. No need. I also have confirmation from Mrs. Collins, the neighbor. Across the street. She saw Victor at your house at least 3 times a week while you were at work. She even snapped the license plate, thinking a stranger kept showing up. Victor stared at his lap, fingers knotted. Jason sagged back into his chair. I knew this would wreck him, but truth waits for no one. I slid over Martha's valuation. These are the home improvement costs you plan to use for reimbursement. Every item paid from my separate account, with my signature on deliveries. This house is entirely separate property. No one has a right to even a percent. Kelsey bit her lip, eyes wet, but I saw no remorse, only fear. I pushed the final set of papers to Victor, a separation ultimatum. Victor, I've already signed. You keep the shop and the truck, they're your labor and contribution. But this house, my mother's house, where I've lived all my life, you won't touch it. If you sign today, I won't pursue criminal charges for financial abuse or interference with ownership. If not, my attorney files in the morning. He opened his mouth, and I lifted my chin, voice cooler. And before you say anything untrue, remember this is being recorded legally. I've filed notice of recording with counsel. No one leaves until we're done. The air thickened. I could hear the clock ticking like the house's heartbeat. I looked straight at Kelsey, voice low but firm. As for you, I've filed an ethics complaint with the North Carolina Bar for using your legal knowledge for personal gain within the family. They'll investigate. Maybe it's a suspension, maybe disbarment. That depends on what you choose today. Her mouth fell open, lips quivering, hands laced as if to hide them. Jason stared at his wife, eyes full of hurt and disappointment. I stood and gave a small signal. The door opened and Daniel Whitaker walked in, jacket crisp, file case in hand. He glanced around, nodded to each of them, and sat beside me. His voice was low and steady. I represent Mrs. Linda Carver. This meeting is formally noted in the civil record as a witnessed family conciliation. Objective: reach a voluntary separation and confirm asset allocation. From this moment, all statements carry legal weight. If anyone leaves, it's considered a forfeit of response. Victor sat rigid. Kelsey hung her head, tears starting. Jason watched me, torn in two. I knew he was breaking, but at least he would see with his own eyes, not through someone else's sweet lies. Daniel reviewed the record I'd assembled. I didn't interrupt. I just watched my hands around the warm teacup, lighter than I'd felt in years. After 40 years of blind trust, for the first time, truth was on my side. When he finished, he said clearly, Mrs. Carver offers 2 options: sign the separation today or the case proceeds to county court. All parties are advised to limit statements to avoid aggravating factors. Silence stretched so long I could hear the wind outside. Then Victor nodded slightly, voice rough. I'll sign. I didn't smile or nod. I set the pen in front of him and said quietly, Good. And you, Kelsey? I met her eyes. I don't need an apology. I just need you to leave my son's life and let him heal. As for your career, let the bar decide," Kelsey cried. Head down. Jason sat still, eyes wet. I had no tears left. I only wanted the long afternoon to end so the house could have the quiet it deserved. Daniel gathered the file, verified each signature, then asked, "This meeting is concluded. Copies will be retained with my office and the county court. Mrs. Carver, anything to add?" I looked around the room that had been this family's heart. The photos on the wall, wedding, birthdays, vacations were still there, but their meaning had changed. I answered softly, "No. Everything that needed saying the truth has already said it for me." Daniel nodded. He stood, packed the papers, and I closed the black folder, my own black box. It held not just evidence of betrayal, but proof I'd stopped being passive. When the door shut behind them, the house fell silent, with only a trace of jasmine tea in the air. I sat, closed my eyes, and knew every last lie had been stripped bare. Right after Daniel left, the room sank into a heavy quiet. No more crisp legal voice, no more shuffling papers. Only Kelsey's ragged breaths, broken, shaky, like someone trying to catch the last bit of air. She slumped in the chair, hair falling over half her face. The perfect makeup from earlier had streaked black mascara blending with tears. Her hands shook around her phone. When she finally looked up, those eyes weren't arrogant anymore. They were the eyes of someone who'd lost everything, searching for anything to cling to. I stood without a word. Each step on the hardwood sounded dry and final, like a gavel dropping. I opened a drawer and took out a small, carefully folded paper. It was Lily's drawing I kept in my wallet, the one she made in preschool last week. The family standing in the yard, and in the left corner, a tiny figure with a tear running down her cheek. When I asked, Lily had said, "That's Grandma. She's sad because no one wants to play with her." I set the drawing on the table, right in the space between me and Kelsey. "She doesn't understand grown-up things," I said slowly, each word etched into the air, "but kids feel the cold. They know when a smile is fake, when someone is lying." Kelsey stared at the drawing and broke into sobs, head in her hands. No defense left, no excuse strong enough. Victor sat still, as if waking from a trance. He looked at the separation document, the pen shaking in his hand. I didn't rush him or speak. When he finally signed, the scratch of the pen sounded like the period at the end of 40 years. He set the pen down, voice hoarse. "I have nothing left to say." "Right," I answered softly, "because everything you ever said lives in the evidence you left behind." I poured more tea, but no one touched it. I turned to Kelsey. "I won't stop you from seeing Lily. But from now on, every visit goes through Jason and family council. I'm limiting contact with my granddaughter until there's a new court order." "You're not allowed to be alone with her." Kelsey nodded through tears, voice cracking. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would end like this." I cut her off, my eyes cold as glass. "You knew. You just didn't think you'd get caught." Jason sat still between us, hands clamped over his head. My son's face was pale, eyes red from tears and shock. He looked at his father, then his wife, like he couldn't fit those two images into the same reality. "No way," Jason muttered. "My dad and my wife?" No one answered. Only a long, heavy silence, the kind where you can hear maple leaves falling on the porch. I knew, in that moment, my son's heart was breaking just like mine once did. I stepped closer, set my hand on Jason's shoulder, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "None of this is your fault, Jason. Don't make yourself carry more." Adults forget that what they do doesn't just break a marriage, it breaks the trust of the innocent. Jason choked up and dropped his head onto my shoulder like a child. I let him cry, my hand moving slowly across his back, feeling pain and relief at the same time. I knew I had saved one thing, the truth, even if it cost the rest of this family. Victor stayed seated, staring into nothing, No trace of the man who once said, "I'll protect you for life." Now he was just an old outline, alone in the wreckage he made. Daniel came back after a few minutes with his case. He spoke quietly to me. "I've completed the confirmations. All documents will be filed with the court in the morning. The assets are divided exactly as you proposed." I nodded. He looked around the room with kind eyes but didn't interfere. As he gathered the files, he slid each page into the leather case, then turned to me. "You should change every password today. I'll send a security template prevents unauthorized access." "I know," I said, "and I will. Bank to phone, email too." When Daniel left, I turned back to clear the table. No one said a word. I heard Victor get up and pull the small suitcase I'd already placed by the door. "I'll go now," he said hoarsely. "I won't come back." I didn't look at him. "That's the best thing you've ever done for me." The door closed. A small sound, but inside me, it thundered. Kelsey staggered onto the porch and pulled out her phone. I heard her voice, strangled with tears. "Jason, I'm sorry. I was wrong. It's my fault, not yours, not anyone else's." Jason looked at her, his cheeks still wet. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Kelsey. I don't know how long I've been living in a lie." She tried to touch his hand, but he stepped back. Not out of hate, because an invisible wall had gone up between them. Love, when betrayed, doesn't shatter like glass right away. It fissures first, then goes numb. Kelsey turned away, crying without sound. Jason stood there like someone who'd lost his bearings. I wanted to say something, but there's no sentence strong enough to mend that. Finally, I said, "Take a few days. Don't stay here. Go to a friend's place or back to your old campus. I'll handle the rest." He nodded, eyes rimmed red. When they both left, the house was quiet enough to hear the clocks tick. I gathered the cold teacups, stacked the leftover folders, and locked them in the office safe. I changed every password, account by account: bank, email, cloud, even an old social media login. I updated security questions, removed old links, and turned on two-factor authentication. Daniel had said, "Whoever controls information controls the board." I understood that now more than ever. When I finished, I opened the cabinet, took the black file, the one I called my black box, sealed it in a waterproof bag, and drove to the bank. I placed all evidence and original papers in a safe deposit box at the main branch. The banker asked, "Anyone besides you authorized to access this?" I smiled faintly. "No one. Just me." On the way home, I lowered the window and let the wind through my hair. Asheville cooled toward evening, but I felt a strange calm. I had lost a marriage, lost trust, lost the illusion of a perfect family. In return, I'd gained freedom, the thing I didn't know I was missing. When I parked at the gate, I looked up at the house, now empty. The last light of day came through the frame, catching tiny dust motes in the air. Maybe tomorrow I'd clean everything, repaint the walls, set a few new pots of flowers. The masks had fallen. The truth was bare, but it was also the first light after years of dark. I shut the car door and gripped my keys. Inside, the house waited for me, quiet, clean, and for the first time, entirely mine. In the days after, my home was quiet again, but not the suffocating kind. It was order and calm, like after a storm when the wind has passed and the ground still smells of rain. I stood in the living room with morning light coming through the windows, dust drifting in the air, dust I hadn't noticed for years because I was too busy, trusting. On the far wall hung our wedding photo, me in white, Victor in a black tux, two young people smiling with the naivete of forever love. I took it down. The dark wood frame left a lighter rectangle, a scar of memory. I wrapped the photo carefully, put it in a box, and sealed it. Not out of hate, but to make room for new light. I repainted the room a warm cream that let the house breathe. With each stroke, I wiped away old layers, not just paint, but silence, hurt, and lies that had clung to these walls. I changed the curtains, reset the desk, arranged the shelves, and hung up the landscape Lily drew for me. Grandma and me in the garden. It was simple, but when I looked at it, I felt a joy I'd forgotten. I decided to turn the house into a literature classroom. Every morning, I held a small class for older neighbors, people who'd left school for life and children. We read Shakespeare, Dickinson, Frost, and sometimes wartime love letters. They told me they came not just to learn, but to remember how to keep living. Maybe I was learning that too. One April afternoon, Jason came back. He'd lost weight, but his eyes were lighter. He stood at the door, a suitcase in hand. "I'm coming home for a while, Mom. Lily needs a quiet place." I only nodded and opened my arms. We hugged for a long time. I didn't say welcome home because it had never stopped being his home. With Jason back, the house had laughter again. After therapy sessions Daniel helped arrange, Lily started sleeping through the night, fewer bad dreams. She sang and drew again, only now her pictures didn't have Grandma crying in the corner. We gardened together. Each morning Lily and I planted another row of white daisies. Jason fixed the fence and repainted the gate. In his eyes I saw a light I hadn't seen for a long time, the light of someone learning to forgive himself. I also saw a therapist, as Daniel suggested. Dr. Marion, silver hair and a steady voice, told me, "Linda, forgiveness doesn't mean accepting what they did. Forgiveness means you let yourself move on without carrying them in every step." I wrote that in my notebook. At night I'd reread it and add, "I didn't seek justice for revenge. I sought it so I could rest." When the legal work was done, I set up a trust for Lily. The house, savings, and small investments would slash and did all be hers when she was grown. I didn't leave anything to anyone else, not out of spite, but to end the loop of grabbing and dependence. Lily deserved a future that starts with trust, not suspicion. As for Kelsey, I had no contact. Daniel told me the disciplinary process was underway. The ethics committee had opened a review, my recordings included. Maybe she'd be suspended, maybe worse. I didn't feel happy or sad. Everyone learns their own lesson, the one they choose. Victor still ran the little shop outside town. None of us reached out. I wasn't angry anymore, but I didn't need to forgive either. We all have our roads, and mine was clear, now straight, with no one else's shadow. Summer came, and the neighborhood buzzed again. Neighbors brought apple pie, strawberry jam, and handwritten cards. "We admire you, Linda. Thank you for showing us courage has no age." I lined the cards on a shelf, each one a small piece of returned faith. At night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat by the window and wrote a journal called Lessons from the Marriage Class. I didn't write about betrayal. I wrote about what survives loss, self-respect, clarity, and the strength to stand up. I wrote, "Love is a long class. Some graduate with honors, some walk out empty-handed. But if we listen closely, even wounds can teach us something." I sent a draft to the local paper, and they ran it in the Life After 60 section. People called and wrote to say my story helped them leave bad relationships. I wasn't a hero, just someone who finished her own lesson. Then, one late fall afternoon, Lily turned 6. We made a chocolate cake and lit 6 small candles. As she closed her eyes to wish, Jason and I shared a look without words. The 3 of us blew out the candles together. The little flames died, and the white smoke curled up like an old spirit finally released. Lily cheered. "Grandma, Mom says when you blow out candles you have to make a secret wish." I smiled. "So what did you wish for?" "That you'll always be here, so I can tell you stories every night." I pulled her close, her hair smelling like sunshine. On the porch, white daisies trembled in the wind. Inside me, not the scar of betrayal anymore, but a new foundation built from old bricks. I said softly, a closing line to all those long months, "Grandma will always be here, Lily. Some women, When their house collapses, don't leave, they rebuild it, stronger, brighter, and full of love. That was the day I knew I'd walked the whole painful road and stepped into a new one where freedom, trust, and peace were the fair rewards for someone who rose in the ruins. November in Asheville, the season turned. Trees along Montford Avenue switched colors, red like coals after summer's fire. I stood at the classroom window and watched Lily play in the yard with neighborhood kids. She laughed, circling the white daisies we planted in spring. No one would guess this house had once been a battlefield of lies. That morning, pouring a second cup of tea, the phone rang. Unknown number, familiar tone. Mrs. Linda Carver, I'm the assistant with the North Carolina State Bar Disciplinary Committee. We're calling with the result of the investigation into Miss Kelsey Moore. I held my breath. Yes, I'm listening. After reviewing the file, recordings, and evidence you provided, the council has decided on a 5-year suspension and requires restitution of legal costs and a civil damages payment to you, per court order. I didn't cheer or glow. I set the cup down and let the steam drift like a long sigh. Some wins need no applause, only the return of calm. A week later, Daniel stopped by with a thick file. The county court's approval of the property agreement between Victor and me. The house, savings, and Lily's trust all in my name. He set the pen down and said evenly, "You can rest now. It's officially closed. No one can touch these assets." I nodded quietly. He understood I didn't need more words. The court also issued a restraining order against Victor 300 feet from my house, no expiration. When Jason heard, he said only one thing: "This should have happened sooner, Mom." I saw some of the weight lift from his eyes. He was learning to stand without bitterness. Once the paperwork had seals, Jason filed for divorce from Kelsey. I knew it wasn't easy. Logic says yes. The heart splits again. But this time, my son walked straight, no longer led by blind love. I went with Jason to the first hearing. Family court wasn't crowded, just the scratch of pens and the smell of new paper. When the judge asked, Jason spoke with steady restraint. "I'm seeking custody of Lily, Your Honor. She deserves to grow up in a healthy environment." The judge scanned the file and nodded. Evidence of Kelsey's ethical violations made everything clear. By the end, the judge ruled temporary custody and educational decision-making to Mr. Jason Carver. Mother's visitation with supervision, up to twice a month. I couldn't hold back tears, but this time they were relief. I hugged my son outside and whispered, "You did it, Jason." "It's going to be okay," he answered, voice shaking. "I still have a place to come home to because of you, Mom." News moved quietly through the neighborhood. No gossip, just understanding. People looked at me with that quiet respect saved for those who walk through fire without burning. Victor, Daniel said, sold the machine shop, liquidated the rest, and moved to Tennessee, maybe to start over, maybe to escape the eyes of the past. I didn't ask more. Sometimes leaving is punishment enough. Kelsey left the state after losing her license. A friend said she's working at a small office in Missouri, teaching legal skills to students. I don't know if that's true. I only hope that when she lectures, she remembers the law isn't a shield for deception, it's a hand for protecting justice. With the old faces gone, my life turned a new page, quiet but meaningful. One early winter day, the president of the Asheville Women's Club visited my class. Afterward, she smiled. "Linda, we'd like you to share your story at our next workshop. Topic is financial self-defense for older women. No one can tell it as plainly as you." I hesitated, then agreed. The next week, I stood in a room of women in their 60s and 70s, silver hair, kind smiles, and that light I recognized in myself, fear and hope together. I told my story without anger, just steady. I talked about catching financial fraud inside a family, protecting accounts, and most of all, protecting trust. I explained family fraud investigation in simple terms. Sometimes the person who deceives you isn't a stranger. But the law still stands with whoever tells the truth. Someone asked, "Do you regret doing all that?" I smiled. No, justice isn't for revenge. It's how you close a chapter without bowing your head. The talk ended with long applause. An older woman squeezed my hand, eyes wet. "Thank you, Linda. Because of you, I'm checking my joint account tonight." I laughed and squeezed back. That's a good student. That night, back home, I opened my laptop and looked at the documents that ended the long stretch: the restraining order, asset decree, suspension decision, and custody order, all tidy in a folder named Justice. I printed one copy of each, bound them, and set them on the shelf next to my favorite classics. Lamplight hit the glass, highlighting the first line on the file: Linda Carver versus Victor Carver and Kelsey Moore, Civil and Family Case, 2025. I ran a hand over the title, not with bitterness, but with rare peace. Lily ran in and hugged my legs. "Grandma, can I tell the class tomorrow how you teach?" "Justice?" I laughed. "Justice, huh? Do you know what that is?" She tilted her head, thinking, then said, "It's when the bad person says sorry to the good person." I hugged her, laughing through tears. "Close enough, Lily." But sometimes justice doesn't need an apology. It comes quietly, sealed with a red stamp. That night, I wrote the final page of Lessons from the Marriage class. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't always arrive with a gavel or late apologies. It arrives in documents, signatures, and restored trust, and when it does, the once deceived can lift her head, smile, and move on without regret. I closed the notebook, blew out the small candle, and looked around the house, once a battleground, now a sanctuary of truth. A cold breeze moved across the porch, carrying the last leaves of fall, and I knew justice had arrived quietly, but right on time, like a guest I'd been waiting for my whole life. I never thought I'd start over at this age on my own, but not alone. People ask if I'll remarry. I just smile. After a lifetime learning love, I know some things last longer without a chain. Happiness is simple now: Lily's laughter in the yard, Jason calling, "Mom, I made tea," and late afternoons with my literature group. They come not just to read, but to learn to love themselves again, just as I did. I spend more time in the garden out back, rows of white daisies, purple lavender, and tulips from last spring. Every morning I water them and watch dew gather on the leaves. When Lily plays, I show her how to plant seeds and tell her flowers are like people, they need light and rain to grow. The anger is gone. Forgiveness doesn't excuse the betrayer. It frees me from the chains of the past. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, but it lets me walk past it without carrying the rage. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I stand in the hall and watch Lily sleep. She's curled in her pink blanket, breathing evenly, face soft as an angel. I smile. Every loss, every wound worth it if it leads to this. Peace without pretending. On Sunday morning, I hung a small wooden sign on the porch. Hand-carved letters, white paint on old oak, "Only truth lives here." I ran my fingers over each stroke, like touching a promise to myself. In this house, there's no room for lies, fear, or dependence. Only honest love and trust built with time. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter to myself. "Linda, you've walked the longest road of your life from naive to awake. You won not with hate, but with clear thinking and steady heart. You kept what mattered most: honor, freedom, and light inside." I folded the letter into Lessons from the Marriage class. Outside, Asheville light slipped through the curtains in golden lines across the hardwood. I closed my eyes and listened to wind in the branches and Lily humming somewhere in the yard. 40 years. All the ups and downs and wreckage just to learn something simple. A house doesn't keep people for long. A house keeps only the truthful. And this morning, As sunlight crossed the frame and warmed my cup, I smiled. The final exam of my life graded. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of this road. If you're still here, it means you listened not just with your ears, but with your own scars, memories, and lessons. I tell this not to reopen pain, but to remind us, even after betrayal, we can stand without losing our dignity. Because justice isn't just in a courtroom, it's in the way we choose to live the rest of our days, peaceful, self-respecting, and without hate. And if this story made you feel seen or stronger, please like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so we can keep going together, sharing stories of strength, grace, and the small miracles of everyday life. I'm grateful you listened and stayed like a quiet friend sitting with me in this small house, reminding me there are still hearts that understand and believe in the good.